In the previous video, I got all the mill scale off of the blade with an acid bath and a bunch of cleaning and sanding. I then spent several months engineering and implementing 2 different methods of machining the large side bevels. Now, we're working on a method to machine the 2 small bevels at the tip of the blade. Wish me luck, this is a risky one. Alright, so this is what I ended up with over here. I've got the giant lifting magnet attached to the hoist. I've got an extra little bit of safety over here. This is a 10,000 pound ratchet strap. The idea being, while I was positioning this, my feet were directly underneath this. And even though I wear steel toes, that could certainly be a grievous injury if this landed on me, especially on one of these edges, right up against my legs or something like that. So I was slightly nervous and I didn't really want to bother filming it because it took me about 3 hours to do this. You may think this little clamp is overkill after having these 2 giant ones on here, but the problem I'm running into now is I have removed so much of the sword that the sort of internal stresses of the sword from the original, process of making this plate have caused this to warp a little bit. So this end was actually coming off the table a little bit, even though I had these monster clamps on it. So this is just holding this down to the table. It's not really actually doing anything else. I'm gonna have to get creative with my clamping as I continue to go on here. There's not really any way to straighten out this giant blank, at least not with the equipment that I would have. All I gotta do now is pick this table up, set the angle, tighten everything down, and then we can finally get to milling. Maybe I can do this one corner in, maybe 4 hours or so. Yeah, good times. All right, I am bringing you back early. I've already run into a new snag. I can't lift the table high enough. I had to use these 2 jacks, I believe these are 10-ton jacks. I had to kind of turn one, then the other, then this one again to get it into position so I could get that one in place. The hoist was actually stalling out, and I'm not really sure why. It's got a 1,000 pound capacity, but it just wouldn't lift it any higher. I think what is happening is there's so much of the sword sticking out over there that it's putting a lot of pressure on these 2 hinges to the point where the friction is so high the hoist can't lift it. Like I said, it can only do 1,000 pounds. Even crazier, if you come over here to where I need to operate the machine, this is my perspective. This is what is above me when I need to walk under here. And it's slightly terrifying. It's just kind of this giant guillotine sticking out into space directly above my head. All right, well, I don't know if you can really see this, getting very crowded in here, but I've got my first pass all set up. We're ready to give this a shot. This thing's hanging out here. I've got everything tightened down. I ended up purchasing another one of these screw jacks, so I've got them kind of lightly snugged up to just add some more rigidity to this whole setup. This is still nice and tight, it doesn't move, so the weight is still on there, my angle is still correct, but I've just got a little more reinforcement than just these side things, so we'll see how that goes. Alright, so I've got the 2 little bevels done on one side of the sword anyway, and I noticed a problem. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I like to show my mistakes. I only show some of them because, I don't want my videos to be 30 or 40 hours long. But I'll take you in here. If you notice, so this bevel transition here, this nice line, it starts at this edge here, right at the corner, and then it meets the corner of the blade almost perfectly. That is pretty nice. I'm happy with that. And the same thing with the center line. Comes down and it ends, that is pretty close, pretty close. But then you come over here and this is right on the corner, but then it comes down and oops, it misses by about 3/16 of an inch. I honestly can't even figure out how that happened. I accurately measured like this distance versus this distance versus this distance, so on and so forth, and there was less than 2% variation in any of the measurements. 2% variation isn't super great for, you know, an accurate machine job, but for a sword that, especially something this size with, you know, this many cut transitions, you know, 3 transitions per side to do all the cutting, that's not bad. So the question is, how did this happen? And my only theory is that it's the warping problem from before. When I was doing this cut, I couldn't get any clamps, you know, on the tip of the blade. There was nothing to grab, and the clamps were all kind of back here. And if you'll notice, even just sitting like this, there's a little bit of a gap. You can see the gap under the table. You can see a little bit of daylight under there. So my theory is the blade may be kind of C-shaped or banana-shaped. And so when I clamped it down here, it exaggerated that gap. It lifted up either this end or even just the corner. And if this corner was lifted off the table, more of this corner is going to be in the cutter, and it's going to remove a little extra material from this edge. And you can even see that that's what happened. If you look down the line, you can see there's a little bit of a step as it hits right on the edge there. This edge is slightly lower than the rest of the blade. Anyway, I'm going to flip this blade over. I'm going to do the last 2 mini bevels there. And that's going to be it for the blade machining.
Several days later.
All right, here she is in all of our glory. Look at that. I have to say I'm pretty pleased with the appearance of the thing. It actually kind of looks funny on camera. The forced perspective of the camera is making this end look really thick. Let's try the other side real quick. Oh yeah, now we're talking. Except I can't really even get the whole thing in the shot. There we go. I'm holding the camera above my head, really high up. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea. Little thing is too big to really film it correctly. All right, so back down to business. So this bevel here, it ended up coming out basically perfect. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. Oh, it's really hard to show both sides. This is just kind of the light and dark thing. But I think you get the idea here. That lined up nearly perfectly. All right, the tip here came out really well. All 4 bevels kind of come together almost perfectly. I don't really know if it's coming out fuzzy or not. It's really hard to tell in the viewfinder, but that looks pretty good. Can I do this? Can you just focus? Yeah, there you go. That looks a little bit better. About as close to perfect as it's gonna get. And then we come over here. So, did not line up with that edge. The line is to this side of that corner. And what's doubly confusing is it's actually the opposite of what it was before. Man, I don't know if you can see that. Basically the line is right there on the right side, and while this one is offset on the left side. Pretty much the same distance too. So it doesn't really make any sense. How is that even possible? I went ahead and I measured from the tip to this point, the tip to that point, exactly the same. You know what? Is the angle on one of these wrong? Let me get my little protractor. All right, let's see what we got here. Just a cheap digital protractor, basically. All right, let's see if we can get this lined up. That's pretty close. Touching on both sides, 150 degrees. Let's check the other side, the good side. Okay, let's get this lined up a little more that way. I'd say that is just about perfect. So, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's, if at most we're off 1/10 of a degree, and I'm really not holding this just right. It's kind of hard to do this while I'm looking at the viewfinder, but you get the idea. Fascinating. All right, well, I don't know. I kind of give up, I guess. I really don't have any idea how that happened. I was kind of hoping that they would both be off by the same amount. You know, they would line up at least, so then I could adjust this angle, you know, kind of feather it in with a file or something so that, you know, this edge, and this edge all meet on the top and bottom, but it's just, it's not gonna happen. I'm gonna have to kind of sand this part kind of push that line over just a little bit, and then do the same thing on the underside from the other side, and kind of make them meet, hopefully all together. That's going to be, that's going to be tough, but it probably won't look as crisp as it does now, but I'm not really sure what else I could do about it. I'd rather have that line be a little bit, you know, rough, a tiny bit wavy, and have everything line up. I think that'll look much more satisfying, and it'll be less likely to notice, you know, a slightly wiggly line versus, you know, this not meeting with this corner. That's very apparent to the naked eye, and it's actually very slightly worse than the other side. Kind of comes out, yeah. That's weird. It's actually a little bit less, which actually makes even less sense. You'd think, you know, it would be off by the same amount on both sides, assuming I made some sort of error, but man. Whatever, anyway, moving on. All right, so it's very late, and I can barely even think right now, but it's time to weigh the blade. Now, if you remember, I predicted the sword, I think 325 pounds, and obviously this is just the blade, so I'm gonna guess probably right around 300 pounds. My best guess, you know, after we add the handle, the pommel, the handguard pieces and everything, I'd say it's probably 25 pounds worth, so yeah, 300 pounds. I've got this zeroed out. It's showing a negative weight because it includes the magnet, which is now stuck to the sword, so it's not actually, you know, weighing the magnet. This must be in kilograms, right? Because the magnet is pretty heavy. The magnet's like 50 pounds or close to it, so let's see here. Alright, we are not touching the table. You can't see, but it is not. And can you see this? Yeah, 137 kilograms. That is just over 300 pounds. I'll put the number up on the screen here. When I actually edit this video, my math isn't amazing at this time of night, but let's call it 300 pounds. Is that? That can't be. Did I actually guess it right on the button? Huh. Well, I guess we'll see how I do once I actually weigh the completed sword. It would be pretty funny if I actually guess both of them correct. It's gonna be really close then. That's too funny. Alright, I'm going to bed. Till next time. So, next steps here. Let's transport this thing through the demolished doorway and get it on a workbench. And I'm gonna, again, work on these lines and then fix all the little imperfections here. Kind of make everything a little more consistent. And I'll bring you back. I'm gonna actually do a black oxide treatment on the sword now. It's not gonna be the final one. I just kind of want to get an idea of what it's gonna look like, because if you've ever seen the anime or read the manga, the center of the sword is kind of unfinished, I guess. It's, as a blacksmith, is probably my best guess. So I want the surface to be kind of convincingly rough, in sharp contrast to the nice bevels, just like the real Dragonslayer. Now, if I bring you in here close here, you can see this is the factory finish. This is the hot rolled finish, and it's pretty rough, but I'm not sure if, you know, when I blacken it, is it gonna wash out that texture, or is it gonna highlight it? So I don't really want to mess with this surface until I have a good idea of what's gonna happen once it's blackened. So long story short, we're gonna blacken this as a test. I'm gonna hand sand all these bevels to get all these imperfections out. It's taken some damage in some spots. One right here, there's a little nick. And if you follow this, it leads to more nicks. I'm actually probably gonna have to weld in these ones and then sand it all back. It just comes from, you know, this sword weighs so much. The steel is relatively soft. Well, as soft as steel can get anyway, but moving this kind of weight that's relatively soft into solid things creates all kinds of little dings and nicks. There's even one right on the tip here. It's right, you see it? Yeah, it's right there. I think what happened is I just kind of pushed it into one of the clamps, you know, the clamp that was sticking up out of the table, and that's all it takes. Oh, and one final thing, I wanted to bring this over to this table so I could inspect it, and I'm curious how much it had warped. And the answer is not much. Let's see, yeah, you can just see right as the camera gets level, you can see a little bit of air under this end, and then a little bit down that end as well, so it's kind of cupped upwards very slightly. Let me just test that out real quick. All right, so I just got a standard piece of paper. It's actually very thin paper, but it's probably 3/1000 of an inch thick or so, and I just want to see here. It's getting pretty hard to move now. That's pretty much it. So it's kind of sticking up in the air a very tiny bit, you know, for the last foot of the sword maybe. Let's try the front of it here. All right. Oh, not very much at all. Just a few inches maybe. It's really just this part of it right here that's in the air. I can't get it any further than that, so that's pretty good, I guess. Yeah, I can't really see any air under there. I'm really not going to try to bend it. This thing's 2 inches thick, and it's off by such a small amount. I mean, I would just have to bend it probably at that point where it starts to curl up, so it would be like right here. I can't even imagine what kind of force it would take to bend this thing. It's 14 inches wide and 2 inches thick, so I don't know. I would probably need like a 100-ton press, something like that. I have a 20-ton press, but I've come pretty close to maxing it out on just 1/4 inch thick material before, and this is 8 times thicker than that. So yeah, not gonna happen. All right, so believe it or not, I've actually been standing here for about an hour trying to figure out how I'm gonna do this bevel, or rather fix this bevel and minimize the risk of screwing up, because if I screw it up, it just gets really complicated, because it's difficult to add material back without re-welding it, and I can't ruin this part, you know, this line here. I don't want to ruin the outside line. Furthermore, clamping on a double beveled surface like this is really difficult, because even if you get a clamp that can do that you know, compound angle, like this guy over here, I tried this. The problem is when, you know, you're squeezing down on two surfaces like this, it just wants to slide off that way, and I couldn't get a good clamp. So I've got 2 switchable magnets here that is not going anywhere. So I'm starting at the top of the original bevel, and then I'm kind of moving it over so it exactly matches the bottom bevel. You should be able to see that. There's the bottom bevel right there. It's a little dark, but get it lined up just about right with that bar. So I just got to remove this little hump right here. This edge is going to get a little weird, but I think I can you know, blend it in, and it'll visually look correct. Now I could use an angle grinder to do this, but I'm actually just going to use this. It's a random orbital sander, and one of the nice things about it is it's variable speed, and it doesn't remove material very quickly. So I don't want to overshoot this and really make this edge too thin, and then I don't know what I'm going to do at that point. It's going to look all wonky, and the only way to fix it would be to re-weld the whole thing, fill it all back in, you know, remachine it or sand it down. It's just going to be a complete nightmare. So I pretty much got one shot at doing this and having it look pretty good. So cross your fingers for me. All right, so 2 hours later, I think we're looking okay. My plan of using the steel bar as a guide ended up being a complete and total failure. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I ended up with a divot, a shallow divot, perfectly parallel with the bevel right here. In fact, you can still see the edge of it right there. I can almost catch it in the light. There's a very slight divot there. I'm just leaving it for the moment. But I think what happened is, by having the guide here, when the sandpaper pushed up against it, it just kind of curled up the edge of the sandpaper and it dug in right in front. So basically, I took my guide off, I just drew a line, and then I hand sanded and hand filed it until it was just about right. And if I catch the light, you can actually see where the divot was. It's just very, very slightly. Now, did I line it up right? Yeah, that's pretty good, I think. I think it came out not too bad. Now, this is not the finished product. I kind of did like 90% of the work here, but truth be told, I'm going to be sanding every surface to get all these milling marks out and everything. And plus, I have the rest of the sword to build. So at some point, I'm going to screw something up on the sword. I'm going to, get a little dent or a nick somewhere, and I'm going to have to repair it. So my goal is to just get it to 90% for now, and then once the sword is completely done, I will finish the bevels and the edge, the edges and everything. Make sure everything is absolutely perfect before I pack it up and ship it off. But yeah, so that was a waste of a night, but at least I didn't totally screw it up. Now let's get onto the black oxide testing. I have cleaned up the surface. I kind of sanded it lightly, scotch-brighted it, and degreased it and acetoned it, maybe 10 or 12 times. I just want to make sure there's nothing on the surface, no oils or anything that will affect the treatment. This isn't going to be the final treatment. I just want to see what it looks like. You can actually see how rough the factory mill surface, finish basically is. It's extremely rough. And I'm hoping that translates with the black oxide. If not, I'll have to artificially, mark up the surface more. But I think this is a pretty good starting point. Oh, and you'll notice the plastic sheeting on the table. The simple matter is, black oxide is a form of rust. I mean, it's an oxide, right? And the product used to create that can cause real rust if you don't get it off. And I don't want it running into these T-slots on the table, because it'll start the rusting process, and it's going to be really hard to clean these out, effectively. So hopefully this works. Now normally I'd be doing this outside, and I'd kind of hang the sword up, vertically, and then spray it down. But I don't really have any way of grabbing the sword very well at this point. And not only that, but it's the middle of winter, so I really don't want to be outside in the 20-degree weather with like a hose and everything. So hopefully this works. It's going to get all over the floor, but I don't think this floor can really get too much worse, so I think it'll be fine. Alright, so here we go. That was 3 black oxide treatments. That's usually about as black as it gets. Yeah, it looks pretty good. The black is consistent. I don't see any splotchy areas. Now, the texture is still there. If I bring you in closer, looks pretty good, but as I suspected, once you get a little bit of a distance, it just kind of washes out. The black is just kind of evening everything out. So you can see a little bit, but it obviously doesn't have the texture of Guts' sword as displayed in the manga. So I'm gonna have to come up with a plan for at least lightly texturing the whole thing. Not sure how feasible it'll be to actually texture the whole thing. I mean, ideally I would just kind of heat the whole thing up until it's glowing and then hammer the hell out of it like any blacksmith would, but that would be an extremely tall order to actually get this thing hot enough to do all the hammering while it's still hot. It just not really a reasonable solution, I guess. So I'm gonna probably do some cold hammering, and I've got some ideas for that. At least this is a good test of the blackening and a good benchmark for the texture. Now I'm sure the black oxide got under this. It's just painter's tape, but yeah, not too bad. I'm just gonna sand this off real quick and then get back to the real sanding, the finished sanding, so we can get an idea of what it's really gonna look like when it's done. That's a start, at least. Alright, so this is just a standard, boring sanding clip, but I wanted to include it because you can see just how rapidly and satisfyingly the sword transformed from just a little bit of cleanup. Alright, so I let the oil dry overnight just to try to get a realistic look, more or less, of what it'll look like all the time. And I think we're there. It's slightly mottled. It's got some texture to it, you know, as forged. It's not perfect, but that's kind of the point. It's meant to look like a, you know, as forged section of the sword, right? I also lightly sanded the bevels just to kind of give a little bit better contrast so I can get an idea of what it'll look like when it's done. Obviously there's still all these semicircular marks everywhere, but for this test, I think we are looking pretty good. I doubt I will actually try to retexture this at all. We're calling it good. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, so what I found that works best here was to alternate between the belt sander and the random orbital sander. The belt sander removes material more quickly, but it's easy to dig into the surface by accident. The random orbital sander makes blending out those dig marks easy, and the constant switching off of the machines help keep the motors from burning out as well. Alright, well that's, you know, 20% of the sword done. Maybe 3 or 4 hours of work. I was not expecting it to be that difficult, but I guess when you really think about it, the vast majority of the swords I've made had like a 1/2 inch bevel. This had a 3-inch bevel, so we're talking literally 6 times as much material to work on. Plus, the sword is one of the longest I've made, so there's a ton of material here. I mean, the Buster sword had a big bevel as well, but it was, you know, significantly shorter, and it only has 1 edge and not 2, so still less than half the work of this thing. So anyway, long story short, this is as good as it's gonna get for now. I've got this at an 80 grit. You can see there's quite a few scratches in it, but I'm gonna finish the rest of the sword first before I really try to make this very pretty. Honestly, in the end, it'll probably be 120 to 220 grit. I'm not trying to make this polished and absolutely stunning. That's not how it ever looked in the anime or manga, even when it was new. So what you're seeing is actually pretty close to what it's gonna look like when it's done. If we look down the line here, you can see it's pretty good. Very few defects. The lines are almost perfect. There's a few little problems here and there where, you know, I kind of just dug in just a tiny bit too much, but, you know, the edge is nice and straight. I'd say it's good enough. You can kind of see over here in contrast all the milling marks and everything and the roughness compared to this. This is so much better. Now I just have, what, you know, 12 to 15 more hours left. No big deal. Honestly, in retrospect, what I should have done is when I was milling this, I should have kind of taken a final pass, a really light cut to really make the surface finish nice. I didn't realize how much work this would take to get these kind of rough machining marks out, especially over such a huge amount of square footage. A little late for that now, I guess. Okay, well, that is it for now. I've got this whole thing top and bottom sanded to 80 grit or so. It's not perfect, but I have gotten all the milling marks out, and I've gotten all the, you know, the imperfections out. Well, I should say there were 2 left over, actually. There's one right here. The problem with this is if I fill this in with weld and then sand it back, I'm gonna have a smooth spot on the top of the surface, and it'll be essentially impossible to kind of replicate this texture, and it'll look really out of place to have this, like, you know, smooth section right here. So I hate to leave any of my swords with any sort of imperfection, but I think that's just gonna have to stay. It is full of grinder dust, which is making it stand out, especially against the relatively shiny surface here. I'll probably kind of wire brush it when the sword's finally done and just get it nice and clean. It's not quite so obvious. I may go back and even sand it very lightly. I'm probably gonna make it worse, so maybe I shouldn't. Only other remaining issue is on this side of the sword. There's a tiny nick in the blade. This is where it hit one of the stops on the milling machine, and it's just such a thin surface with such a heavy blade, it actually kind of dented it. It mostly came out through all the sanding, but not quite. However, I'm not actually concerned about it at this point because all of this hand sanding has removed enough material that this edge is extremely sharp, and I really need to file this down because it's out of control dangerous. And when I file this edge slightly, that is going to disappear, I believe. So overall, I'm pretty happy. I realize that's all very nitpicky stuff, but that's who I am. What's crazy here is all this hand sanding, the amount of hours I have put just into getting these milling marks out of here and kind of making everything look, you know, relatively uniform. It's about the amount of hours it takes me to make an entire smaller sword, like say the Raider sword, from scratch. The whole sword, soup to nuts, you name it. All that time just spent on just hand sanding these bevels. So it's been about, I don't know, 3 weeks I would say since I finished milling this, maybe even 4. It's kind of amazing to really think about how much work that was. Anyway, enough rambling. Let's leave the blade for now and let's go make some other parts. Alright, so I heard to be a real YouTuber, you gotta pimp your merch in every single video. So here we are. I paid a really excellent artist to make me some 80s inspired PHM designs, and she gave me 4 of them. I was gonna pick one, but honestly I like them all, so here they are. I got this one right here. I've got this one as well. Very nice. I really like the color scheme on this one, but I think this one's my favorite. It's kind of got like Outrun / Motley Crue vibes. Definitely right in my wheelhouse. Alright, that's it. See you in the next part.